how many years you guys spent and how much capital was deployed ultimately to get nowhere.
For Northern Gateway, we spent over 600 million.
Wow.
And it was a 10-year full-on process.
So 10 years and 600 million to get a no.
Do you think that if you guys went through that process and you did everything again, that you would have better luck going forward?
I did an assessment for the Alberta government back in 2019, and they were looking at how could they unlock LNG investment. And I get cautiously optimistic that they're being addressed by the key people, and that's the federal government.
You know, hearing this, I'm going to take the under on this thing getting done within the next 10 years. I just think it's hopeless.
The dirty secret is that no one's ever going to get paid back. People have the shortest memories when it comes to investment. We just got to get Keith into Bitcoin.
Hey, there's a bubble.
What does it look like when two leaders, each defined by experience, innovation, and performance, unite to elevate Canadian real estate lending? With nearly a decade of serving the needs of investors, borrowers, and mortgage brokers in the alternative market, Neighbourhood Holdings has now taken a major step forward by acquiring Fizgard Asset Management, forming one of the largest alternative mortgage lenders in Canada. Together, they manage nearly 800 million in mortgages across more than 2,000 borrowers and over 3,000 investors nationwide. Through the Neighbourhood banner, the team works directly with mortgage brokers across Canada, providing short-term mortgages for quality borrowers who may not fit traditional bank criteria. Every loan is backed by real assets, ensuring a measured, conservative approach, seeking to provide investors with stable income while preserving invested capital. Whether you're a mortgage broker seeking flexible financing options or an advisor looking for regular income solutions, Neighbourhood's expanded reach brings track record, transparency, and opportunity, now even stronger with Fizgard's 30-year legacy. To learn more about the Neighbourhood, visit neighborhood.com to view the offering memorandum or speak to your financial advisor today. This is not advice, and consult a professional advisor before investing a Loonie in any of these investments.
Welcome back to the Loonie Hour, episode 233. As always, joined by the two amigos, soon to be three amigos. We have a special guest coming on the pod. But without further ado, Mr. Rich Diaz over in Montreal, Keith Dicker, Boomer over in Halifax. What's going on?
Gentlemen, I'm not feeling so hot, but I am excited. I'm excited because I'm going to Calgary later, a couple of days ahead of schedule for our.
Oh, you're going there
events.
first? I thought you were going to Vancouver first.
No. Wait, what? We have Calgary is our first show, and then Vancouver. No, I'm gonna go ski.
Rich is the sailor. He stops at every port along the way just to hang out.
I've got a lady in every port. No. I'm going skiing this weekend with my.
What's the mountain there?
Kicking Horse.
Oh, you're going to Kicking Horse. Nice.
Yeah. So I'm actually, believe it or not, I'm actually going with a guy who, my first ever job was at BCA Research as a chart monkey, is what I call it. An analyst, research assistant. Wasn't even an analyst. I was a research assistant. And the guy who I sat next to, his name is Brandon. And so he's the guy who I go skiing with. He's an amazing skier. Anyway, there you go. That's my story.
Coffee runner. Rich Diaz.
That's what I did. I was a chart monkey. People were offended by that, but I never really understood. That's all we ever did. Like, we'd get an email from somebody, a managing editor, and they say, make this chart. So U.S. Purchasing Managers Index from 19.
That's why your charts are so good today.
That is why my charts are so good today. Sign up for the Loonie Hour Substack, and you'll see exactly what
that's a good plug. Nice segue. We do have a new Loonie Hour Substack, though. So if you're interested, the goal is to pump out a piece a week, a nice, good, detailed piece between the three of us and a couple special guests that'll be writing for us as well. And just another little piece to add. Boomer.
And then,
you have anything interesting to share with us, Keith? Anyways, we have Calgary on the 23rd of March, Vancouver on the 25th. For the Loonie Hour Investor Series. Tickets are sold out, guys. I do apologize. We're getting a lot of emails saying, I want a ticket, wait list. I don't think it's going to happen. I'm going to be honest. So save your emails. But we will be doing more of these this year and in the future. We're going to keep ramping it up. So.
Okay. So guys, I'm back from my holiday. And so interesting thing. You guys know the game Connect 4? You guys seen that before?
Yes.
I don't know if Steve has in his world. Maybe.
Well, I mean, certainly not a game I play, but anyway.
Steve has no fun ever.
So I'm undefeated with Connect 4, especially you have the big one on the beach, eh? And so I love playing that. I've only ever lost to one person in my life.
This is Ice Cap.
No, she's easy to beat.
He's listening to this.
It's Junior, like the math wizard. And he's gone. But it's interesting. So, Junior's at Waterloo doing math, and, he can run circles around you, Rich, with numbers and stuff.
I don't doubt it.
But it's kind of interesting. He's doing actuarial science, which is very analytic heavy. And he said, whenever they go to different events and stuff, there's always Connect 4 lying around. And so I say to him, well, man, that must be a bunch of smarty guys, doing Connect 4. He said, no, Dad, you'd be surprised. All the math guys are horrible at Connect 4, which I thought was really...
Well, why? Did he say
why?
I
don't know. No, he said he doesn't get it. They can do the weirdest kind of math problems in the world, but yet they can't see, 4 or 5 moves ahead for this thing. Anyway, I was the guy on the beach down south that was...
Did you hustle
really
people,
selling.
Keith?
No, I'm not that kind of guy, but
make a couple extra bucks.
Yeah. Anyway, it's good to be back. You get more, the air is more crisp, and I think you go a bit soft hanging out down there for a while.
Agreed.
And I'm back, Steve. Let's roll with it.
Let's go, baby. We got a lot to get into. There's, last week you had the Canadian jobs data. We had every central bank out this week, so we're going to kind of walk through that. Obviously, what's happening in the war in Iran, energy prices. We're hearing of more reports about bombings of LNG plants and shortages of fuel that are hitting other parts of the world right now. So we're going to get into that, but we do have a special guest. I think the timing of it is actually, a lot of these guests will book, weeks, months in advance in some cases. So you're never really too sure how the guest is going to line up with the current news cycle. And so we put this guest on our calendar a couple months ago, and I think it's lining up to be just perfect timing. So the guest today is John Carruthers. He is one of Canada's most experienced pipeline and energy infrastructure executives. He's got 40 plus years in the energy markets, but basically he was the president of TC Pipelines from 1995 to 2000. He was the president of Northern Gateway Pipeline over at Enbridge, and government advisory roles with Trans Mountain expansion between 2018 and 2024. So long story short is, if you're looking for somebody that has experience and actually knows how to get a pipeline built and the economic benefits of such, I can think of no other better person to bring on. So we're looking forward to having him on the show. Again, I think it's just, Rich, given where the world is today,
go on.
the desperate need for energy, particularly infrastructure, oil and gas from domestic allies.
You don't say, Steve.
Can't think of a better time.
You don't say.
So it's perfect timing for the conversation today, then.
It's better to be lucky than good, I think. Isn't that right, Keith?
You mean with Connect 4? Is that what you're talking about?
Exactly.
Okay, let's go, Steve.
Without further ado, let's bring John in right now. John, welcome to the Loonie Hour.
Howdy. How's everyone?
We're doing great now that you're on the pod. You made it.
Yeah,
very few technical difficulties. Well, we teed you up before you came on the pod, but I wanted to get maybe just your coming from you yourself. What would you say, your background? Give us the high level of where you spent most of your time and energy.
Sure. I've gone through a lot of aspects, starting with Dome Petroleum, very interesting, and spent a lot of my time in the finance world where we had to refinance the debt. That was we had too much debt and a lot of international lenders. So that was quite a complex reorganization where we couldn't pay our debt, but actually got the shareholders some funds ultimately. So that's where I started, and then ultimately moved over to TransCanada in the pipeline world. I've spent a lot of time with TransCanada and Enbridge, and I think the most relevant experience would be my time as president of Northern Gateway, where I took the project through the regulatory process. We received approval from the federal government, but then it went into the Federal Court of Appeal, and our permits were quashed, and then the government didn't redo the consultation. Subsequent to that, well, actually, interesting, I got a call from the federal government after that saying that I was up skiing in Fernie. Government had got a call from Kinder Morgan, said they wanted out and they needed somebody with pipeline experience. So I helped the government in terms of their negotiation with Kinder Morgan, and then stayed on to advise the board from an independent perspective of the project development. Was it being done with respect to mega project best practices, and were they meeting their plan? And as with them for that process through the reconfirmation by the National Energy Board and the federal government, and through construction to completion. So, in summary, probably Northern Gateway and Trans Mountain are the most relevant experience I'd have on this topic.
So I think that's, we're lucky to have you on. I mean, on the Northern Gateway side, what was the main deal killer on that? Obviously, is there anything that stands out directly?
Yeah, so I think
because you originally had the approval, right? And then obviously you had all the opposition afterwards.
Right. And I think it was that opposition. We had approval and we could have started construction with that approval, but we didn't, because we still didn't have broad public support, and particularly on the coast. Coastal First Nations were in adamant opposition about a pipeline. And fundamentally, I think it was a key issue with Northern Gateway, and that's why we added it to the regulatory application. Was people were very concerned that there would be a large spill in the marine environment. So we included the marine aspects in the application for approval of a pipeline, which hadn't been done before. So we had to look at the safety of marine vessels, the environmental assessment. But that was a key issue. And really it was driven because people thought there would be a major spill for sure, and it would devastate the coastline forever. And they kept referring to the Exxon Valdez. So we put that into the regulatory process to try and give people, to address a legitimate concern. If you actually thought it was going to do that, then project should progress. But fortunately, we went in and did a lot of mitigation so that ultimately we got the risk of a spill at a similar size of the Exxon Valdez. So that'd be, say, 250,000 barrel spill, pretty big spill. We got the risk of that down to that would occur once in 15,000 years. But a key aspect, but I think that still was the one that ultimately we weren't able to convince people that the project was safe. And I'm going to say that consumed a lot of the regulatory. We were 4 years in the assessment of Northern Gateway in the regulatory process. And with that, you file thousands and thousands of pages of information. You hire a lot of experts. That information gets information requests from both the board and the pub and then interveners. So it goes through a really significant testing of the evidence. Fortunately, we had a lot of experts, but we spent, there was 180 days of testimony for Northern Gateway. So you just very extensively research. And I would still say that the marine aspects were the big one, and not getting not just coastal First Nation, I would say the Haisla in particular, because they're the First Nation that's located at our the proposed terminal site, Kitimat. So they were the key First Nation, and unfortunately, we were never able to get alignment with the Haisla, regardless of the mitigation. So I think that was the biggest. Yep.
No, I'm first, Rich. I have my hand up. John, why don't you just share with everyone in one of simpler terms about specifically with the Exxon Valdez disaster, accident, whatever you want to call it, why that may be considered an unusual event, and how how today we're able to minimize that risk. That is one of the overriding arguments that people on the street would hear all the time. So maybe just quickly address on, that's not something that's a significant potential risk.
Well, it would have been a significant risk at the time, but because of the Exxon Valdez, which happened in 1989, there was a ton of focus on making sure ship traffic was safer. And all of those, so it was really informed. I mean, the first one was you can't have single hulled ships anymore. They have to be doubled hulled. So that's a complete secondary cover of the containment of oil. So first you have that, and then you have the tanks that are segregated. So you wouldn't have just one big tank if you had a collision that could spill out the entire volume of oil being carried. It's all segregated so that if you did have a collision or something, there's a minimal amount of oil that could ultimately be spilled. So I mean, I think the biggest one was double hull ships became mandatory around the world, not just for Northern Gateway. And then we did a risk assessment and looking at, well, what is the probability of a spill? Then what do we have to do? And so ultimately, to make marine traffic safer, the ship design is one thing, and those ship design all has to get validated, and then so no ship can come in unless it meets the standards. You also have BC pilots board the ship as the tankers come in from international waters, and so the pilots are very familiar with the BC coast, highly trained. And then they would board the ship and take direction of the ship so that there couldn't be any uninformed mistake. And in fact, we put 2 pilots on. So
sorry, John, I just wanted to interrupt there. So specific to this project, you have boats designed specifically for that?
No, not we do for the tugs, which I'll get to, but not for the tankers themselves. But they would have to meet a standard. So there would be, say there's 1,000 ships, 300 may qualify as meeting our standard, and so you couldn't come into port unless you met that standard. So
and one more point of clarification that people don't know, but because I'm a big time sailor, I do. Pilots are people who are put on a small little boat and sent out to much, much deeper waters, then leave that boat, go into the tanker, and basically assume operational control of the tanker to get into much shallower waters, right?
Yeah, good summary. And those, they're highly trained, they're highly experienced, they know the coast, the BC coast extremely well. And so we put 2 of them on, and they have independent navigation. So you have the ship navigation system, the pilots would have their own as well. So you're layering some redundancy on to make sure there's no issues there. But so we couldn't bring a ship in without 2 pilots. And additionally, then we had confirmed through a simulation. So there's a simulation, not unlike you might see an airplane pilot learning to fly a plane before actually doing it. We had simulations that were tested by the BC pilots and tanker captains, but that confirmed that a tanker could go through the channel, the Douglas Channel, unaided. But in fact, for a loaded tanker, we were having it assisted by 2 tugs. One tug was tethered so that if there was ever an issue with respect to steering or propulsion, that tanker or that tug could take control. And then there was a second tug that also escorted the tanker. So you're putting a lot of redundancy and things in place. We would also have a lot more navigation systems, and that would have come through Transport Canada. So a lot of redundant systems. And I'll say the other key thing is we would do this on our own through our experts, because helping us, we had, like I say, BC pilots, tanker captains, a lot of effort being put in. But we went through a voluntary process that's called term poll, but it's all federal agencies, starting with Transport Canada, the Coast Guard, the pilots, fisheries, and they also do an assessment of can this be handled safely? It's, they have all their experts, and we have to submit volumes of information, and they make recommendations. And of course, any recommendations that they made, we would have accepted. But so there's a lot that goes into making sure you won't have another Exxon Valdez. And since Exxon Valdez, there hasn't been a big spill from a double hull tank. Like they still had some issues with single hull. Yep.
So that's my question. I mean, you mentioned earlier that you said the chances are 1 in 15,000. I mean, those numbers are rather abstract. And I would submit to you, aren't they sort of irrelevant when you have a regulatory body that's just dead set on not allowing the project to go through? I mean, you could, even if you could guarantee safety, it seems to me that there was, from top down, an idea that this should just not proceed. And so how do you as a company navigate those waters, to pardon the horrible reference?
For sure. That was the way we navigate ourselves, was to put it front and center into the regulatory process, that this is a key information that people want good answers. And the one answer some people want was just no. So, I mean, that obviously there was a lot of opposition. And I think particularly the Heisla, they didn't matter what that study came out to, is you can get it as low as you want. They just didn't want to accept it. But the regulatory process itself brings all those issues to bear, and with expert testimony. And I'll tell you one thing I found of interest in terms of the tanker, because the Rain Coast Environmental Organization put out a tanker study themselves. Okay, so this tanker study, they didn't want to put it into the regulatory process because it had no credibility, but it got a lot of attention from news media. So it often get referenced, but they didn't want to put it into the regulatory process because it could get challenged there. And unfortunately for them, it did get put in by a First Nation community in their evidence, so that they had to speak to it. And the first question is, well, who prepared this and what experience did they have? And they had none of them were naval architects or mariners. And so really that study lost a lot of credibility, but still got referenced by mainstream media. And in comparison, our expert was a naval architect who was head of a major naval engineering firm in the U.S. And then by the time we had him testify for us, he was the president of a naval architectural school, which only did marine architecture. So that's our witness. Again, as I say, with our captains who can speak eloquently to, how they take ships around the world, not just in British Columbia, but Scotland, Japan, even Eastern Canada that have similar waters. But that clearly was a big issue, that no matter what you did in terms of trying to provide credible evidence from our own experts and from Canadian, like Transport Canada, it was a big hurdle.
So my question is, again, if you thought in good faith, so again, I just believe that the actors were just not acting in good faith. So credit to you guys for trying to tick all the boxes. I think you were sort of fighting what I view as a losing battle. Clearly, there's some changes in, I'm being hopeful, but there are some changes in the philosophy in Canada towards our oil exports. Do you think that if you guys went through that process and you did everything again, that you would have better luck going forward? And do you think that there's been a change in the optimism of the actual pipe manufacturers and owners and all that stuff towards that?
Okay, well, there could be. I mean, I would say I did an assessment for the Alberta government back in 2019, and they were looking at how could they unlock LNG investment at that point for Alberta. And after talking to all of the producers, we came to 4 necessities, and one was federal and provincial political support and leadership, clarity on Indigenous consultation, a credible regulatory application, and clarity on the impact of carbon. So we had those 4 were the impediments. Those impediments, though, are now all being addressed, and I get cautiously optimistic that they're being addressed by the people, the key people, and that's the federal government. Mark Carney entered into that agreement with Alberta, and then he's also gone to Asia to solicit interest in energy exports. So clearly there, and they are now addressing the regulatory considerations, very much supporting First Nation participation. So I think, and then of course they'll have to address the carbon issues. So it gets very complicated, but everything is being addressed. And I think it's being addressed because it's so important and people want to get to the right answer. So I read a quote from Premier Smith and said, the best time would have been to build this project 10 years ago, but the next best time is now. And I'm seeing that. I actually think progress is being made and people are honestly trying to get to the right answer.
Well, we share that view. I know Steve wants to jump in, but I have a couple more questions.
On your last pipeline there, like, I guess my question is, you said, well, one of the First Nations group there locally was, they were not in support of it politically and they didn't want it to go through. And so I guess my question is, we had a First Nations legal expert on the show, I don't know, not too long ago. And we have been told, at least it's our understanding, that, there is a duty to consult. And that's really it. And so I guess, my question is for someone like yourself that's actually been through this, like, what is the requirement to get First Nations agreement? And who's to say that we don't run into this issue again? Like, we're already hearing it. I'm in BC here where, Premier David Eby is saying, well, the coastal First Nations, they don't want this. They don't want this. They don't want this. And whether that's actually true or not is another question. But yeah, I guess I'm wondering, what is the actual requirement?
Yeah, a good question, because I think that's the biggest issue. My belief is that the consultation's well defined and understood, and it's through several Supreme Court decisions, and then it was particularly well defined in the federal court appeal rulings for Northern Gateway and Trans Mountain. In both cases, it was determined that the NEBCER, that's the Canadian Energy Regulator, came to the conclusion that after extensive review, that consultation by Northern Gateway and Trans Mountain was set up and operated well, and they were quite complementary. And where it fell down was the Crown consultation in confirming if Indigenous concerns were addressed, and if not, resolved the rationale. And for Trans Mountain, the federal government successfully addressed those shortcomings. So I think there's a clear roadmap in terms of they engaged Frank Iacobacci. He was a former justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, and in response to the court's findings that they'd failed to engage in meaningful two-way dialogue, he redid the deficient Crown consultation. And I think his conclusion, and he went through all of what was done and how it was done. And it was done with the intent of securing free, prior, informed consent. And so there's a lot of discussion of what that really means. But definitely the principles of the aim of securing it are legitimate. But he clarified that it must be remembered that there was no right of veto by an Indigenous group in respect to project approval. So I think there is a clear roadmap trying to balance the interests of Indigenous communities and the broader public. And I think there's a way to do it. And I say that because, again, I think both Northern Gateway and Trans Mountain process through their responsibilities went well. And I would now say that the government knows very well what it needs to do to ensure it has done its proper consultation. And that's consultation with the rights holders. And sometimes you hear some associations may have a view, but clearly the most important are the individual First Nations that have rights. Really, they just want a say, they want to share. And I think there is a way that can be accomplished.
John, let's just shift the conversation just a little bit. So 2 questions. First one's an easy, actually it might be more difficult for you. Now that you've become a Loonie Hour guest star, who in your family will be most impressed?
Oh, good point. Well, and interesting. Well, I have 6 kids and a wife, so there's a lot of interest in this. One son is a huge fan, so I got to believe that might give me some credibility with him. And of course, my wife is a big opponent, more a proponent of your show than me, maybe, because she thought this is something that should be done. And largely, I mean, I think just as you're trying to do is get some information out to people. And I think that was the and we talked a little bit about that, trying to get the right information to people so that they can make an informed decision. To me, it's a tough slug. But so anyway, I'm going to hopefully share this with my my wife and kids, obviously.
Maybe well, you're already getting more support in your family than I get over this way. Let's shift a little bit here. Have pipelines been approved or in the process of being approved in other places outside of Canada that can show us as a roadmap of what would work better or not work? Is it only here in Canada where we're kind of struggling with this opportunity?
Sorry, and if I can add on to that question, Keith, I don't know if John, if you can also chime in if you've had any experience working in other countries on pipelines, for example.
Certainly. I mean, I've spent much of my time in the United States on pipelines and some international as well. And part of it, though, that experience went back before we got this increased opposition to oil pipelines. So at one point, pipelines were pretty boring. You'd have to look hard to find them on the financial page. And then that exploded in terms of opposition. So some of my learnings from earlier pipelines, the Express pipeline, and most of those were like the Express pipeline. I led that, and it went from Canada through the United States. So you had to look at both jurisdictions.
John, is it true that I know you're going to answer the question. Is it true there's 400,000 kilometers of pipeline between Canada and the United States?
400. I can't answer that.
Oh, okay, sorry. Please continue.
That's I haven't worked that long to know how much.
Sorry.
But
you got him, Rich. Good job.
No, sorry. Please continue.
And I mean, interesting. I mean, one of the biggest that was going to happen but didn't was the pipeline that would have gone from Alaska through Alberta and into the markets in Chicago, in the Illinois, Midwest. Now, we built the first half of it from Alberta into the Midwest, but never got the Alaska portion of it. Now, that would have been a huge pipeline going, from U.S. through Canada and into the U.S. again. But there's lots of pipelines, obviously, that originate in Canada and then go through the U.S. And, of course, even some back up into Canada again. But clearly, an example, I think Canada's created its own issues with respect to completing pipeline projects. So,
so that's back to Keith's question, which is like, how long? Like, what do other countries do? How long is their regulatory approval? Is it as onerous or not, and why?
So I would have argued that the regulatory approval. So when we went through Northern Gateway, they were legitimate issues that needed to be addressed. So the process wasn't efficient, but the National Energy Board themselves, in what they were looking at, were very professional and, just trying to protect the public and making sure that Northern Gate was doing everything it could to make sure we had a safe pipeline, both from a spill or an environmental perspective. But clearly, Canada is unique now in terms of what it's like. One, in terms of changing its mind, like Northern Gateway spent $600 million for a year specific process. And then the government, notwithstanding, people had spent that amount of time with a lot of expertise trying to understand the project and ensuring it was safe, putting the appropriate conditions in, the government pulled it right away. So I would have said the regulatory process directionally was okay. It was the political ramifications of it. But I would say what the MPO is doing now, where they are looking at the strategic importance first, and then if it makes sense, you can go through the more detailed engineering to make sure it's safe, is 100% the way to go. So notwithstanding Canada went through a process where regulatory process was extremely slow, duplicative, costly, and then you couldn't be certain of the outcome. And when I say certain of the outcome, I don't mean that you get the answer you wanted as much as you understand the process, and if you do the right things, you can have an expectation of what the outcome would be.
Do any other countries do like countries like Saudi Arabia, Russia, Qatar, UAE, Venezuela, Iran, Iraq? Do any of these other countries have this kind of impediment to exploiting the most important single commodity in the world?
Well, and I haven't worked in those countries, so I can't tell you, but my expectation is no. Like, absolutely not. Like, it's not, it doesn't make sense. And you wouldn't be competing if you, in the international world, if you did have the impediments we've had lately. So I haven't worked in them, but I can.
So maybe with Canada becoming closer to China, maybe our approval process would be closer, resemble what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I actually, again, I'll go back. I kind of like where we're getting to in terms of what the MPO, Major Projects Office, I mean, what the process that they're thinking like, and I would have said it shouldn't be necessarily quite so. I think it should be broad-based, a bit broader based, so that industry is making their own determination. But the process of establishing if a project makes sense from a broader Canadian interest perspective, quite quickly, making, and then there's still some information they need to make that determination. But it's a lot less than when we went through Northern Gateway. We had the whole thing 100%, done. I mean, we had all of the safety aspects for marine. We're doing all those things and making all those investments prior to knowing if we'd get approval. So to me, I think where we're going from a regulatory process, strategic first and then detail second and 2-year max. I mean, that'll be golden. So, I mean, it's almost where we came from. To me, I'm more looking forward. Well, boy, this looks good going forward. Very painful for the last 10 years, but where we seem to be going is very positive.
So on this strategy note, we've spent most of our conversation talking about the West Coast. I mean, there's been a lot. Can you just, I mean, I have a bunch of questions about going east. So in a mini history lesson, boys, don't roll your eyes. In 1860s, John A. Macdonald felt that it was important to Canadian sovereignty to build a railway system, the Canadian Pacific Railway. And thanks to the Chinese and other immigrants that were here at the time, they helped basically create what was an engineering marvel in order to secure Canada's sovereignty. Now, I've made the case that Canada should do the same thing. Basically,
now, Rich, to be clear, the Saskatchewan portion was pretty straight.
Okay, fair enough. But anyway, no, seriously. So all this hand wringing over Canadian sovereignty. And I mean, there was the Energy East project, because a lot of our energy basically gets pulled up from the United States in terms of gas, right? Through gasoline and diesel through refineries in America. I mean, does it make sense from again, strategic and sovereignty perspective, not necessarily economic one, to build pipelines that cross Canada to, again, sort of, replicate what happened almost 150 years ago?
Yeah, so that's a real trade-off, because from an economic, practical perspective, you wouldn't do it. And that's why pipelines were built through the United States, because it was far less costly. So now you have to calculate, well, what's that worth to the country? Because it'll be more expensive, and you won't want to naturally, because and that expense will be put onto consumers. So there's a real trade-off of that energy security question. And the Ontario government actually put out a request for proposal trying to look at gas and oil pipelines from Alberta, various locations, even exiting through the Hudson's Bay or others. And they were looking at trying to see if it was practical to do that. And I think I'm not sure where they're at on that study, but that study would be very informative as to good idea, but is the cost worth it? And it's not easy pipelining through there. So it certainly made more sense to me when we had a super strong relationship with the United States, that on an integrated system, that I don't know why they would have wanted to disrupt that. They had wealth of product from Canada, but now we're seeing, well, there's a reason to consider that I wouldn't have argued 10 years ago that would ever need. but obviously we're seeing it today. And then that is the value of diversity. And I always thought, well, let's go west to diversify our resources, as opposed to worried that Ontario wouldn't be able to get the energy it needed because of policy in the United States. I wasn't expecting that. So I think when we get to it, we could look at I'm not sure where that is, but that's a good start to find out the feasibility of that. And then you can make the trade-off decision, because you still could bring in more energy from the coast as well. Just expand that in terms of comparison and still get some diversity of supply. But it won't make sense from an economic perspective.
Neither did the railway. That's the point,
fair enough.
Right?
No, fair enough. And it has benefits. And then, of course, once it's in place, it'll get well used. So it's not.
Well, that's the issue. I think often people, don't realize how all these people always talk about the negative externalities and the risks, but people never really discuss the positive externalities, which is all these things you didn't think about that were really positive. Anyway, sorry, Steve.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And that's a good observation. But I mean, it'd get used, so it wouldn't be money that was just wasted. It'd have some value. It may not just be the most economic alternative.
John, we're hearing some of this commentary again from the proposed pipeline that Danielle Smith is going to be unveiling, I guess, later this year from Alberta to the BC coast. Your time on the pipeline space, David Eby's come out and said there's no private proponent. Like, I guess in your opinion, would there be a private proponent? I think we've heard Enbridge. Enbridge was in the news maybe a couple months ago saying that they weren't that interested. Do you have any sort of intel there?
Yeah,
do you think somebody step up?
A couple of things. I found it interesting when Eby said, "Well, we don't even need a pipeline because Trans Mountain's not at full capacity." And I'm going, whoa, that's not that relevant for a pipeline project that'll take, up to close to 10 years to be put in place and operate for the next 50. It's kind of interesting what capacity Trans Mountain's at, but it doesn't drive the conversation. And in fact, you don't even want all pipelines at full capacity, because then you get into
what's Trans Mountain at? 80%.
Why not? Oh yeah. Sorry.
Well, if you get them all full, then you get into the differentials where you drop the price of all barrels of oil being produced because of the transportation constraint. So you want a bit of extra capacity, so you're not paying that higher differential, and that affects all barrels. So it's actually quite painful to be at full, oversubscribed.
Is it painful to hear David Eby talk about stuff he has no idea about?
Well, yeah, I mean,
you don't have to answer that.
Yeah, fair enough. But it's informed, and then when those comments are made, the public starts getting a perception. So a couple things on British Columbia. They and Burnaby both opposed Trans Mountain and strongly opposed it. And that's why Kinder Morgan wanted out. They said, well, we're not going to try and build a pipeline in that environment where there's such strong opposition. It forced the federal government to come in and get it completed, but there was full opposition from BC and Burnaby in particular. So it can get done. I would say today there's a lot more general support for an oil pipeline going west than there ever was, even for Trans Mountain. So today we see a better environment. And then part of the MOU between the federal government and Alberta was to go, address those directly, like ensure that there's benefits for British Columbia. Now, there will be huge benefits in terms of investment and construction, taxes, but maybe to get something done in life, you need to make sure all the stakeholders kind of see benefits, and that you don't want to do projects where you have full-on opposition, and that's the kind of way where Enbridge didn't want to progress Northern Gateway until it had gotten better coastal support. And in the meantime, in trying to do that, then the federal government then just said, well, we're not going to redo our consultation. So it died. And then they put in the tanker moratorium.
All right, I have one more question. I know we're going to wrap it up soon, but I was wondering if you could organize a Loonie Hour field trip. I'd really like to see a pipeline.
Well, okay.
I'm putting you on the spot. You have to decide right now.
We can do it. Kind of interesting comment. So you want to see it in construction, because everyone who travels everywhere, there's thousands of kilometers of pipelines that you don't know are there. And that's a little bit why when people worry about them, well, they're across the country and they actually operate very safely. You don't know they're there. You'll say if I drive out to Fernie, we pass a lot of pipelines, but if you know how pipelines are built, you kind of understand there's no vegetation, so you see a gap. So, well, that's where a pipeline is. So I assume you want to see one under construction because they're not that much. They're not.
I just want an excuse. Frankly, I just want an excuse to see any kind of infrastructure and have the Loonie Hour pay for it.
Okay, we'll see what we can do.
But I would love to see a pipeline.
Let's meet up in Red Deer.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Red Deer's a key spot, but yes.
Thanks for being a good sport, John. Steve.
No, happy to.
John, you do feel that a private proponent will step up. I guess I mean, my other question is kind of just.
I'll say yes. I think they will, if there's success on the discussions between the federal government, Alberta, and particularly Pathways, because a pipeline company like an Enbridge won't proceed unless it has long-term creditworthy shippers. So even though Enbridge can make a decision whether it wants to participate, really it's driven by, will there be shippers that want to go? And then you get into the CNRLs, the Cenovus, the Suncors. Will they support it? Well, and key for them will be, do they see the right fiscal balance in place to actually increase production to fill the pipeline? So to me, it's all dependent on the discussions that are going on now. But again, I'm optimistic because it's so important for Canada. And then if you get that going, then someone like Enbridge could become more interested if they saw the regulatory process more reliable.
Just on the Northern Gateway stuff, like just for our listeners that are maybe like less in tune, like what does that look like from like I'm trying to think of like how many years you guys spent and how much capital was deployed ultimately to get nowhere. Like, you know what I mean? Like the risk reward for these companies is just insane. And so I'm kind of wondering what that might look like on a future pipeline from Alberta to the coast. Is that like 4 or 5 years of consultation? Is that like, hundreds of millions of dollars, and then you hope that it passes through? Otherwise, you've just lit a whole bunch of money on fire.
Yeah, I'm quite attuned to that question because, like for Northern Gateway, we spent over $600 million, and that was shared with the producers because Enbridge realized they didn't want to go alone, and they wanted support from the key parties. So ultimately, they tried to share it with producers, and Enbridge probably paid 2/3. But a lot of the potential shippers also had paid in that. And that process, for argument's sake, it was a 10-year full-on process. And as you get into the NEB hearings, like I say, there was 180 days of hearings. You're on the stand. But behind that, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of evidence that's filed. But I will say, so you won't do it. You would never do it again. And that's why you hear Enbridge saying, we're not going to do that, because you wouldn't. It makes no sense. However, I still think with the discussions that are going on today under the MOU, you could get to a place that makes more sense. And I'll say that regulatory process would be, well, they're talking about streamlining it. They're talking about making construction more efficient. So they're addressing all the issues why you wouldn't do it. So I'm optimistic that the outcome of that will be something where people have the confidence to move forward. But it's very complicated, complex. So it's going to be difficult, but it's all there if we can pull it together and get the right leadership. And I do think we're seeing that leadership in both Smith, obviously, and Carney.
So 10 years and $600 million to get a no.
Right. And so when we went into it, you would have had more confidence going through the regulatory process that if you make sure it's safe, if it's environmentally respectful, if you engage properly, that the outcome would be a positive decision. And because it made such economic sense, you would think the government would support, all of the benefits that come with export in terms of GDP, jobs, tax revenue. So
how much tax revenue do you think that decision cost? I know we have to go, or we're going to come up against the time here, but how much tax revenue do you think that 100
billion
in tax revenue?
Yeah. Then that would have split 100 billion. The federal government got the majority of it. And then, of course, Alberta got a lot because of royalties. And then
just
BC,
tax revenue.
Yeah, just tax revenue.
How many EV batteries manufacturing plants do you think we could have bought with $100 billion?
No, it's
I mean, that's crazy. I didn't realize you were going to say such a huge number, to be perfectly honest with you.
Oh, it was like, again, when you went through it, you thought, oh, this makes so much sense. You have to do it properly, no question. And the NEB needed to make sure it was done properly. But I was never expecting, it wouldn't be supported. But again, we didn't crack that nut of, getting public support. But at that time,
you were playing with a losing deck. You were playing against the rigged deck. That's what I would say. Anyway, thank you, John. I really appreciate it.
No, happy, and we'll try and get you out to see a pipeline.
Yes,
you just had to do it, eh, Rich? Couldn't hold back. Keith, do you have any final parting questions as we get close to wrapping this up? I mean, it's been it's really fascinating to learn the business aspects of it, but also the politics, because obviously I think that's what's driving most of these.
It's really interesting, John, because thank you for sharing your experience with us. I don't think people realize in general it takes so long to go through the process, nor do they realize what the potential tax revenue benefit could be in hearing this. And I know you indicated, maybe now we have the right decision makers in place. I'm going to take the under on this thing getting done within the next 10 years. I just think it's hopeless. I'm just not seeing it now.
And why are you saying
going to go, we'll pull through with it. We'll see.
But what's your major concern with that?
Well, the fact that it's taken 10 years for the previous project to not have a desirable outcome. And even though right now it seems like, hey, there's some momentum to get going, I think it's just political momentum, and that can turn on a dime with like just on a moment's notice. And then once we get through the whole sort of regulatory approval process, I understand why they have this in place, but yet I just don't have a lot of confidence that once you have so many stakeholders trying to be involved, that eventually, as they say, I think, they're going to wear you down. And
so I admire everyone. Optimism. Give us some optimism.
How am I wrong with that?
Well, because I think the economic driver for Canada is so persuasive.
But it was then.
Fair enough. But people didn't accept it. Like, I'm seeing far greater recognition of that today than then. And you're right. Even then.
But is there recognition from the people that recognized it before? Or is there new stakeholders changed their perspective? They said, you know what, we were wrong. We actually need to go ahead with the process. Do you see what I mean? Like, it's
I get you. I mean, clearly there's a change at the federal government level, which is critical. We're also seeing a number of Indigenous communities benefiting very well from industrial development, and now they're learning what that can look like. And you still have some of the, and then you still have opposition. So I get it. I mean, as that whole Indigenous, I think there's a process where it can be solved if people just look at it principally and say, we're going to do the highest level of consultation, but ultimately you don't have a veto. And I think that has to be, the discussion that the government has with communities. Like, this is for all of our benefit. And that benefit is widely distributed through GDP and taxes. So,
if we push through with it, it will be incredibly positive for Canada. Right. Foreign investment will come pouring in, and I don't think people really appreciate what the knock-on effects would be from it. So keep it going, and let us know when we're ready for a road trip, because I think we want to see that for sure.
John,
okay, well,
go ahead. Sorry to interrupt you.
We'll make it happen. No, that's good.
Just to wrap this up, is there any one or two policies that you, being the pipeline expert, think could be changed or tweaked, or you'd love to see happen? Like, is there one or two that really stand out to you? Like, these are real impediments? Because I know that the Trudeau era brought in obviously a litany of environmental regulations. I think it was Bill C-69, for example. I think that's been repealed now. But is there anything else that stands out to you that that's got to get changed?
Well, I think that the fundamental one is he has to make the investment in production, so the investment into oil sands, competitive. And so to me, it's not as much the pipe. You've got to get the production to grow. So you listen to what CNRL wants, those parties before they'll invest in growing production. If that can happen, I think other things will come along. And from the pipeline perspective, it's a regulatory, anything to make that more efficient, to make sure that we only spend a few million in terms of understanding the concept and putting it to the major projects office for a determination. So I think that allows people to risk a nominal amount of money to get a decision. So those things are coming into play from a pipeline perspective. The key issue will be encouraging production growth. And so you have to answer all those things to make us still competitive, to make sure that you still can attract investment into growing production, making sure that all of that's in place.
How much of an impediment is the industrial carbon tax then to production?
Yeah, again, that there'll be people. I only know what I read in the paper, but obviously it's to be competitive, you need to be low cost. And I'll say that with everything. It's whether when you're building a pipeline, you need to get it as low cost as possible, because that asset is going to be in place for 50 years. And all of the time when things happen, you see all the assets that, now your net back, so to make sure you have a positive net back in a low price environment. So to me, all of it really you got to be low cost. You can't lose sight of that. You can't. And so anything that increases cost unrealistically, and again, there's things you need to meet environmental standards, obviously, and we're all 100% in favor, but make sure it's efficient and effective. So cost is a big thing.
Fair way to end it. John, we appreciate your time. I'm super grateful for it. I think it's been very enlightening. I think our audience's heads are going to be spinning. But yeah, hopefully we'll have you back on. Hopefully we'll be able to keep you on speed dial here as we get an update from the Alberta federal government here, major projects, and hopefully we can actually get another pipeline built once again in this country.
Yeah, well, April 1, or soon thereafter, will be quite instructive as to, are we making progress, and does that under come a little bit closer to even, happy to keep chatting over time. It's very it's obviously super interesting and very impactful, so I am optimistic.
And thank you for the important work that you do.
Cheers. Thank you, guys.
Well, 10 years and 600 million. That was my takeaway.
My takeaway is I got a field trip to a pipeline being constructed.
Yeah, I'm with Rich on that one. I like a good
I stopped paying
trip.
attention after he said yes to my question.
Yeah. But I love how we continue to have these conversations, and we're picking up a little bit more information each time that we were just unaware of previously. And everyone who is, deeply involved with, the subject matter of any of the guests that we have, they're probably saying, yeah, of course, I know that. But most people, 90% plus in the audience, they are unaware of it. So I think that was a great conversation today. And we'll see if we get some momentum here going in early April. Maybe we'll get John back on.
Yeah, we've talked about it before, right? Which is like, Keith, if there's going to be a pipeline that gets approved and built, it's like, I don't think you're going to have a better political cover today to build one, right? You've got Orange Man bad, tariff stuff going on. You've got the war in Iran, $100 a barrel.
You're friends with the Chinese all of a sudden.
I just can't think of a better position to try to get one approved. And it's like, if it doesn't happen this time around, I mean, I don't know what hope there is, but we'll see. I mean, speaking of which, war in Iran, lots to dive in there, but there's, I think, Rich, you would know all the names here. I'm drawing a blank, but so Israel launched an attack on Iran on one of their largest gas fields there. And then they Iran just retaliated, hitting Qatar's LNG facility. So the CEO said we incurred a $20 billion loss at the facility we built for $26 billion 2 years ago. And I think they said that they believed it impacted about 17% roughly of their capacity. And so that could be impacted for the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. So we talk a lot about crude oil because that's Canada's big export. We do produce and export lots of natural gas, but the world in general, really natural gas is a mega input, into all kinds of things, specifically manufacturing, obviously heat, as well as power, to power generation in all over Europe, America, and the rest of the world. Like UK is obviously very dependent on that. So yeah, so that natural gas thing will have less of an impact in Canada. There'll be knock-on effects, I get it, but the natural gas quotient is extremely important for global, growth projections. We'll be talking about that next week and stuff like that. And yeah, it's crazy.
There was a really interesting quote actually from the Qatar Energy CEO. So he told an interview to Reuters, he says, "Never in my wildest dreams would have thought that Qatar in the region in such an attack, especially from a brotherly Muslim country in the month of Ramadan, attacking us in this way."
Yeah.
So it seems to have escalated, obviously, to a point that I don't think anyone really anticipated. In fact, you had Trump tweeting. I mean, he tweets a lot, but saying that the attack by Israel was unjustified or something along those lines, where basically like we didn't give the approval to do that, and everybody needs to stop attacking each other's energy infrastructure.
That's a bit rich.
I think, though, we can go around in circles quite a bit with, who's doing what and all that. I think, though, we agree here in the podcast, we were forecasting the probability of this happening before most people were, and it is happening. So I think the smart view now that instead of like a lot of people out there on the investment world, they're becoming experts on the Strait of Hormuz, stuff like that. But the next leg of this, if you want to really appreciate what the real knock-on effects are going to be, is that obviously this now is not like a 2 or 3 day war. This is now we're into week 3, and we're getting permanent damage to energy infrastructure. Supply chains are going to be incredibly long to get back on where they were before. So you have to start thinking, hey, what's this daisy chain going to look like next? And this is our view. Rich and I go through this all the time. And Rich actually gets excited when he starts creating a model for it. But the inflation expectation should start to increase dramatically. So we'll talk about the central banks in a second. Like this is like central bank, Woodstock week. They're all doing it at the same time. But then if inflation is going higher, driven by knock-on effects from energy, specifically from nat gas as well, not only is that going to increase the cost at the pump for households, the cost of heating or cooling down your house, but it's going to reduce margins for companies as well. And companies don't like to lose money. They'll eat a little bit of the margin, but then they start increasing prices. So you can see where it's going. But then the next step, companies, then they do layoffs. You get economic slowdown, and it is part of the cycle for here. So then you look around and say, who is the most vulnerable on the planet? Which country, which economy, and probably the ones that are the least vulnerable. And one is the US. I would put Canada very close to it as well. So for Canadians, I think we're in really good position here on a relative basis. But so let's go here. Who do you think is the most vulnerable country or economy on the planet?
Japan.
No. Steve, what's your guess?
What do you mean no?
I'm Richard Dawson here. I can say no or yes. Me or number 2, probably. Steve.
It's going to be
I think Steve said Europe. I think that's what he said.
Well, sure, we'll go Europe. I was going to say like Thailand or something.
No, Europe is absolutely screwed here, guys. And so the irony with this, of course, so think about things in a 360 world. And then remember, you have, the economy is sort of slowing everywhere. And then you have this whole sort of credit challenge that's also escalating at the same time. The moment we see some kind of a liquidity event, and if it's hitting Europe, remember at the same time here, I know I'm rambling a little bit, but the European countries have not completely been supportive of the Americans with the war. Some have and some have not. But all of a sudden, the moment Europe runs into a problem here, they're going to need to turn on the USD swap line with the Fed. And do not be surprised at all if the White House has figured this out already. So the next stage of this is, you have the kinetic war, of course, but there is the opportunity for, financial weapons being threatened back and forth between allies. And this is where we're headed here. So if you like volatility in the investment world, and if you are a serious investment manager, you should love it, because you get opportunity to make money here coming up. But if you are just unaware where this is going a few months down the road, then, just start doing a bit more research. And these things are pretty easy to see, from our side. So Steve, we have excitement here today.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just reading, Keith. I'm trying to find it, but some of these countries that are having dwindling supplies of jet fuel, that they're talking about in the month ahead, they could have to start banning, or not banning, but canceling long haul flights.
Yeah, it's happening everywhere. In all, you got the extreme, of course, over in Cuba, but I think I read this one. I think Thailand is. Did you just say Thailand? Is that what you said?
Cuba's net zero.
But again, sort of, you have to sort of see beyond what some of these sort of linear headline news stories that you're going to see. Like the biggest one that I really laugh at when they say, oh, private credit's contained. These funds have enough liquidity. They've gated, so they've shut off the problem, stuff like that. That is completely wrong. Like, so the shops that are coming out with that, they're not going to look very smart, as we continue down this road. So if anyone, again, I like to start thinking in, it's not even, you don't even have to be 3D. It's just two-dimensional here. This is pretty easy
Connect 4.
Connect 4, you need to be 5D with that, Rich. 5 moves ahead, and you can set them up for it. But that's where we're headed here right now. I don't have any other comments really right now, on the war. But again, it continues to deteriorate for the energy sector. And I think once people start thinking about the knock-on effect, that specifically with margins and what you're paying at the pump and stuff like that. So,
Keith, I'm just going back to like the original conversation that we had with Doomberg, which is what, 3 weeks ago, when the war sort of was just getting started, and his comments about if Iran was still firing missiles, that the U.S. was arguably like losing the war, and I don't know. It seems like it's escalated obviously to a point I don't know if the White House anticipated. I don't know how you back yourself out of this now, truthfully. So it'll be interesting to sort of see how long this goes on for, and if it keeps going at the pace that it's going on. I mean, you have to think these energy markets are just going to cripple the global economy.
Yeah, and again, from an investment perspective, we're not considering whether someone made the right decision or bad decision, or they should do this or that. Instead, we just simply here's the economic and financial outcome that is developing, and then from the very simple perspective, is it getting better or worse?
Yeah.
Then if it's getting better, then okay, let's start shifting what we're doing. As of today, which is Thursday, of course, it's not getting better. Do you see the same thing, Rich, on your side?
Yeah, I kind of reject the premise that I don't want to get bogged down to this. We have so much more to talk about, but I reject the premise that they didn't, what are they called? War room or workshop the fact that Iran was going to immediately retaliate against all the other Gulf states' energy infrastructure. That would be the first thing I would do if I was Iran. So I'm sure they're much smarter strategic thinkers at the White House, despite what other people might think. So I think that was absolutely part of the calculus. What I think is really kind of sad, though, is the food prices, Keith. We talked about it on last week, and it's just something to keep an eye on. It's already starting to happen. You're seeing both the ETFs themselves that track it, but also the individual commodities sort of that are underneath this umbrella starting to rise, both into and because of already supply constraints, but also in anticipation of, which is also kind of weird, right? You have the speculative betting on the increased cost of fertilizer and food and stuff. So just something to keep an eye on.
Speaking of which, the Bank of Canada, there's been some discussion, of course. Everyone's, Keith, we've talked about this in the show around, hey, listen, energy prices way up. This is feeding through into whole various things, as Rich mentioned, fertilizer, food prices, that this could very well be significantly inflationary in the near term. What would the Bank of Canada do? I think, Keith, we've argued that the Bank of Canada will almost certainly look through this, because at the end of the day, I mean, raising interest rates, it certainly isn't going to change what's happening in energy markets. And so the Bank of Canada was out this week. As expected, they held rates. It was kind of it felt like a dovish press conference. I mean,
it was a snoozer.
But it felt tilted dovish.
Yeah. I mean, it only took, I don't know.
He seems really worried about growth.
So to me, yes, excuse me, sorry. Full stop. I think you're right. It was dovish. I think annoyingly, the journalists kept asking basically for the Bank of Canada to intervene. And Tiff, to his credit, got a little impatient and was like, I cannot do anything about global energy markets. He didn't say that. I'm not quoting him, but you could tell he was getting a little frustrated. But yeah, I mean, growth was already on a glide path to decline. I mean, that is a function of having zero productivity growth and a contracting population growth. And I think a lot of this stuff of tariffs and energy markets, I think I get it. They're headlines, and net, they're not good for Canada, but we were already trending. And even if the war evaporated tomorrow, it would still not change the direction of where Canada was going. So yeah, to that point, Steve, I think you're right. It was dovish.
I sense some squirming going on again. But the reason I say that, because if you are a central banker, and by the way, this week, basically every central bank, they had their meeting, and they, surprisingly, that's why Steve eye roll, by the way, they all came out with the same message. But, they understand exactly what's happening here. They're all likely facing a continuation of sluggish growth. Some countries, especially Canada, were struggling with employment. Yet it seems to be very clear that the price of stuff is going to go higher. Mm-hmm. And they also, I hope they would know, by them changing, rates, it's not going to affect. This is this price inflation that we're going to see and that we've started to see already. That can't be slowed with rates going higher. So, show some empathy for your central banker. They're in a real hard spot. But more importantly, what's happening, we'll sort of jump into some of the other ones right now. But now all of a sudden, the expectation, remember what was the expectation for the Fed for how many cuts? It was like 6 cuts, wasn't it? A couple of months ago?
What was it? What was it on like December 31st? I don't remember.
I don't remember. It was four cuts or something like that. It was
four cuts.
Yeah.
I think one point we're at around 6 cuts for the Fed and none for anyone else. And,
that's right.
We were ahead of the game and we said, well, that's just silly. That's not going to work out. I think now today the market is forecasting, 1 cut?
Let me just open it up with my fancy new computer. Oh, yeah. So the curve is, So, so a month ago, there was 50 basis points of cuts, and now there's virtually none. So this is great news because, again, it shows, we like to talk about when there's an anomaly in the economic world, financial market world, identify it and then ask yourself, okay, what's wrong here? How does it self-correct? And the correct with this one, of course, we determined
all the other central banks will start cutting, or the Fed won't start to cutting. And that's how we've now had a convergence. So now we're back to the point where we had convergence with monetary policy for both the Yanks, the Canadians, the Europeans, and the Brits. And I think that was about it this week. Now we're back sort of to this unexpected moment again. So which central bank is going to blink first? And today, none of them blinked. They all sort of came out with the same wishy-washy response. We're watching this or that. But we have the next meet. Is it April they're up again? Or
Canada?
Is it May? Most central banks.
Yeah, well, Europe, it's April 30th. Canada, it's April 29th. The U.S.
So this is great then. So we have another, April, the end of last few days of April.
Yeah.
So we'll have another month out. By that time, we would have seen now data for March coming out around the world, which is after the war has started. So now next month, we're going to see which central banks are starting to squirm a bit more. And, I don't think they'll be raising rates. I just cannot see that happening. But one of them might start to suggest, we have to cut. And of course, it's a long month. So we could have, the credit world could literally blow up.
Figuratively blow up. 40 days from now. It's actually
Loonie hour math. So April 30, 41 days.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is probably one of the most we're going to have a lot of volatility in the financial world over the next 40 days.
Yeah, and interestingly though, the market's doing a little bit of the hiking for them, which I think is also kind of funny, right? Because if you look at that's it. Excuse me. So if you look at bond yields, bond yields across the yield curve in Canada are already have gone up.
And Rich, why don't you share with everyone about credit spreads? What's been happening?
And credit spreads, of course. So so something we've been talking about for ages, and we've explained why credit spreads haven't gone up in the way that we think, even though private credit is getting, well, I don't know if killed is the right word. Keith will think of an adjective, but we're seeing credit spreads starting to widen. Even for investment grade bonds, right? So there's different types of bonds. There's AAA. That's your mortgage-backed securities from 2007. No, I'm joking. So there's like investment grade bonds that are like extremely high quality, and even the spread on that over U.S. Treasuries of the similar duration have started to creep higher. And that's the same thing. So across the credit space, spreads are finally starting to widen, even though we've argued it's a long time coming.
And this makes sense again. Now we're back to, now markets are reconciled. This is what should be happening. So let's see how much further again, I know we have 40 days to the next central bank meetings, but credit could melt by that time.
Well, that's
I like using the word vaporize, but I think melt is another nice one. It is springtime. Our snow just finished melting this way.
Canada 5 years up 40 basis points since the war started. So that translates directly to your 5-year fixed mortgage rate. So for our listeners that are renewing a mortgage this year, it is the largest mortgage renewal year in Canada. You might want to get proactive.
Can we talk about what Carolyn Rogers said?
Yeah. So the Bank of Canada, I'll chat with that. And then Rich, maybe you can chime in on the population data and the jobs number from last week. But which kind of went into the Bank of Canada's decision. But yeah, interesting. Carolyn Rogers, it was Rob McClister actually, who writes a really good mortgage newsletter. I think he founded Rate Spy. Anyways, he asked Carolyn Rogers about the housing market, and hey, it's pretty weak. Like, what are you thinking? What are you seeing? How are you factoring this in? And basically she was like, listen, like, yes, housing is weak. It's actually weaker than what we anticipated. If you go back and look at like our January report, housing is weaker. But house prices need to come down for housing to become more affordable. And we're not there yet. Is effectively what she said, almost word for word. So I found that interesting that she said the quiet part out loud. I don't think she's allowed to say that.
I would just like to congratulate her for having the intestinal fortitude to tell Canadians the truth about housing affordability.
Here's Rich
arrest
looking
this
for a
woman.
date again. There we go.
I'm still, I'm angling. But anyway, this is what people need to hear. I know no one wants to hear it, but it's what people need to hear.
Yeah, she specifically mentioned our like major metro hubs, obviously Vancouver, Toronto. So yeah, it's that is the reality, right? Everybody talks about housing affordability, but nobody wants their house to become affordable.
Right.
And such is life.
But yeah, it's true. I mean, it's just a direct contrast with the let's say, I'll just call it the lies that we've been hearing from Ottawa about, well, they need to build more. It's a supply issue, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's just, anyway, it's good. Good. She said it.
Okay. Next, I'll give you an update on the NIMBY in my neighborhood.
Oh yeah.
Still getting higher. It's not going to stop.
Getting higher.
Is that a shadow I see behind you?
It's 8 stories now. What? It was 2 last week.
It's the foundation is now above the ground, Steve. So
okay.
It's you see the housing start guy out there with this?
Yeah, it's now a start. The guy went by with the clicker. Okay, what else do we have? Any other major central banks
2 more
to
things.
move into? Or go ahead, Rich.
No, I was going to say that the population growth number I think is really interesting. So
I think that's So the other central banks, they all met, but they all said the same thing. So why don't we just move on for central banks?
They basically had the same script. They chat GPT.
No, they use Claude.
Oh yeah, Claude bot.
Or Claude. Claude.
I think
it's Rich. Population growth.
Yeah, just
how much are we growing?
We are shrinking. We are shrinking. So the unseasonally adjusted quarter-on-quarter decline was 103,000 people. This included people leaving and people dying. Although there obviously was some migration, the net number that counts. So that's like a big shift. Listen, we had a completely unprecedented, insane immigration growth and population growth. I would submit to you that negative population growth is also bad. So I hope that we just sort of find some kind of steady run rate that is not stupid and also not negative. Nevertheless, that will weigh on demand, aggregate demand. That's obviously going to weigh on rents and weigh on house prices. It's going to weigh on job growth, which we'll get to in a second. But yeah, it's a huge thing. I don't know, Steve, if you want to add anything.
Well, I just thought it's interesting. I think you've posted that chart, but you literally go like, you see this hockey stick growth. The chart goes to like 1.2 million annually to like negative. I don't know what a negative whatever. So it's literally just like straight up and then just straight down.
Yeah.
I thought the other thing that was interesting is the share of non-permanent residents. So outright contracted last year by over 400,000. So keep in mind that this is part of the Fed, even though they completely destroyed the immigration system. Part of their desire to sort of fix it and repair it was that they wanted to get the non-permanent resident cohort of the population down from 7% to 5%, which effectively requires you to have an outflow of temporary workers and foreign students. And that's what we're seeing. The data is showing that for over 400,000 last year. But that number of non-permanent residents is still high as a relative percentage of the population. So if they actually are serious about hitting their goal of 5%, that number has to continue to decline for the foreseeable future. So I don't know. I think at some point, Rich, they're going to get some jitters.
For sure. Because it's going to weigh on growth.
100%. Well, they ain't getting to 5%.
No way.
Because if you think about it, the growth that Canada's experienced over the last decade is completely dependent upon, or 99%, on more and more people and more debt. That's what the growth was for our country. So now if the people number is now negative, what's going to happen on the debt side to offset it?
Go down.
Well, no, more. There's going to be more debt.
Oh, you mean, okay. Yeah.
The deficit, and same with the provinces, our deficits are just going to explode higher.
Except for Alberta.
And I don't know if if they're getting help with the revenue side right now. But again, people need to appreciate it, that, all the growth we had and, the growth in housing, everything, it was all based on, demand significantly outweighing supply and the cost of buying always being low. And now that has changed, this is toxic, guys. It really is. And people say, oh, you're being dramatic, you're trying to be negative and stuff. This is just math, right? Is just the math, the way it works. Kind of like Connect Four is math, Rich. When you connect them together, you can see how it's going to end. So I'm with Steve here. I think they're going to cave on this at some point. Because this is
you got so close.
So it's time to get long the college diploma mills. Let's go buy one.
Keith got so close to saying it. You got so close to saying it. Our growth was dominated by credit and credit expansion that fueled the housing bubble, but also mass immigration that was completely outside the normal thing. Because you almost said it. The only way to sustainably increase your growth is through productivity growth. Thank you, Carolyn Rogers.
Loonie Hour University.
Steve, let's give Rich credit for saying that.
Thank you. But anyways, it's just what's interesting. So we just one more thing on this population thing, and we'll switch to the unemployment if that's okay. But remember, we talked about it ages ago. Like, what was the excess number? And if you just do a regression from 2006 to 2016. Which is a fairly good sample, especially because it includes relatively high immigration anyway, which is, again, high immigration is fine. My objection has always been to bananas immigration, which is not fine. But what's cool is if you do sort of an excess population growth, relative to trend, it's actually come off quite a bit. So at one point, it was about 2.5 million people above that 10-year trend. And now we're down to just under 2 million people. And so we'll see. I mean, I can share the chart on our Loonie Hour Substack if you want. But it is cool. And but you're right, Keith and Steve. My bet is they're going to blink, because without productivity growth and population growth, it means our GDP growth is going to be very low, and those deficits are going to explode. But anyway,
I do have a question on that blinking part. And this is kind of maybe a bit of a segue. I know we're getting closer to wrapping up the pod, but Keith, I'm kind of wondering, this all plays out right now with what's happening in the world with terms of the war. The deficits are just getting racked up. You're going to have probably a significant decline in consumption and in growth as a result. But I have to think when you come out of this, it's control print.
I agree 100%. So
what does control print mean?
Print, baby, print.
You mean the Central Bank of Canada?
Whatever, central banks, governments. You're going to have.
Rich just lost all the credit he just built.
No, I knew what you were talking about. Not everybody knows what control P means.
Control P. Again, getting the timing of that is always the challenge, but you're
So we talk about, again, the third, fourth tier knock-on effects from where we're going, and Steve, this is a perfect observation that you're just sharing with everyone. Deficits are going to surge, so governments are going to spend everywhere, especially defense spending. It's going to go up dramatically everywhere, and then other spending as well. So when you say, well, who's buying the debt? And if the economy is slowing and the job numbers are negative, which we just saw in Canada now for a couple of months, I mean, there's less private capital available to buy that incremental increase in debt issuance. So by default, the buyer of debt, it is going to be the central banks. So they'll be doing it with quantitative easing or QE. And that just means then, there's the credit spreads have to blow out. So again, these things are incredibly, the visibility with where we're going, I think it gets more clear to see what it's going to look like. And then I also do the eye roll when I see, the latest big bank comes out with this report on this market. I'm like, are you guys even sitting down and having a normal Loonie Hour conversation? Because again, I think it's incredibly easy to see where we're headed, but debt is going to explode for everybody, not just Canada and the Americans, everywhere.
Yeah.
You can't. There's no substitute for productivity, Keith.
But how does Canada turn on productivity within the next 6 months?
You can't. Not at all.
10 years to get the pipeline going.
No, that's exactly the point. I mean, we that. I totally agree. CapEx, private sector CapEx is flat. The only CapEx that we're seeing in Canada is from the government, which is A, not enough, and B, let's assume it's appropriately.
And by the way, when we get this, like we mentioned earlier, Canada on an aggregate basis, on the currency side especially, will do better than almost everyone else. That's what we expect. But inside Canada, everyone's not a winner. This is one situation where socialism is not going to be expressed. Yeah, the commies are going to be but Alberta, like anyone that's commodity sensitive, should perform a lot better on the revenue side than the other provinces. And again, this stuff should be easy to see.
Could have used $100 billion tax revenue right now.
It's just so ridiculous. Oh my God.
Okay, guys. So this time next week, we'll be discussing what other fun time we had at the Calgary event. Thank you, everyone who's coming, and same with the Vancouver event. So we got a busy week coming up.
There'll be more. There'll be more. We got lots more. But as Rich mentioned earlier, the Loonie Hour Substack got a couple articles. They've been written so eloquently by Rich and his charts. So if you don't like it, just drop him an email. But we're trying to grow that and obviously, provide more value to our audience. So check it out. And as always, we'll see you next week.